Hello everyone, welcome to Lesson 3 of Sight Size Drawing. If you watched Lesson 1 and 2, I discussed ways to check your proportions of both the objects and the shadow shapes, and how to recreate those shapes on your page in the exact size that you're seeing them. I've gone ahead and I've done just a little bit more. I've erased a lot of the extra lines that I had in here. I had some construction lines, I had a square around my circle just to help me with deciphering the actual proportion of my circle. So I've just erased those, and then I've filled in the initial value for the shadows. Now with this first value layer, I think about building my values up in layers, and I use a bunch of different pencils. So I typically start with the lightest pencil I'm using in this case is a 2B, but I always start with the lightest pencil, and then I work towards my darks. So I layer the softer pencils over top of the harder pencils. If you try to press down too hard with a hard pencil, it leaves little incisions in the paper, little indentations, and then it makes it harder to lay other value tones over that because you'll actually see little ghost lines. So try to always remember to start with the lightest pencil that you'll be using. And I've gone ahead and I've created a little value scale here that shows the full range of values that I will be working with. So I've labeled each one. So right over here, we see the white of the paper, and I've labeled that P for paper. This is a value that I apply just using a shading tool, which I'll show you in a little bit, called a tortillon. And that just has a little bit of extra graphite on it, so I just rub that in, and I created the next value. The third value here, I used a 2B pencil, which is the lightest pencil that I'll be using today. There's also H pencils, which are even lighter, but I won't be using that for this drawing. So the 2B here I used with just a little bit of pressure, not too much. This again is a 2B with about medium pressure. Here's a 2B with a little bit more pressure. Now at this point, if I start pressing too hard, I start to get some of those indentations in the paper. So for the next darker value over here, I switched to a 4B pencil, and that obviously there's a pretty big jump between the 2B and the 4B. Here I've used the 4B again with close to full pressure, about medium hard, I could say. And then this is my darkest pencil, which is the 6B, and with that I used full pressure. Now the softer pencils blend more easily, and they don't really indent the paper as much because the tip of the pencil itself is so soft. So I can get away with putting more pressure down with the softer pencils. And the difference between the hard pencils and the soft pencils in this case is the numbers. The 2Bs are hard, the 6B and the 4B is a little bit softer, and then the 6B is the softest. So something else that I want to mention is the importance of squinting, especially when you're starting the drawing off and you're trying to understand your shadow shapes. It helps to flatten the shadows out. So for example, if I'm looking at this shadow shape on the ball, if I squint, this is all gonna read as one solid flat shape. I'm not gonna see all of these variations because there's a lot going on here. Even in just this shadow alone, it's darker right here, then I have some reflective light right here. I have a little bit of a transition here. So if I squint, some of that still shows, but it's not nearly as obvious. It flattens the shapes out and makes it easier to understand those shadow shapes in the early stages. Okay, so before I start drawing, I just want to mention one other tool that I will be using, which I had mentioned before, and that is a tortillon. Now this is just a soft piece of paper that is rolled up and telescoped, so it comes to a point, and it's used to blend. So if I lay value down with a pencil, I can blend with this. It just evens out what I've put down on the paper and makes the shading much smoother. So I'll be using this throughout the process. Now I'm going to start drawing, and I'm going to actually speed the video up. I'm going to do a time lapse so you can see how I am putting my values down, how I'm blending, layering, etc. So without any further ado, I'm going to get started. I will explain afterwards what I've done, and I will also try to put notes up while I'm working, so you have a better understanding of when I'm switching pencils and so forth. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and get started now. Okay, I just want to make a comment here. So when I'm looking at the value of the core shadow, which is this shadow right here, I want to try to figure out exactly how dark that is. Now, it's not super dark. It's not as dark as the cast shadow, which is down here. And in order to figure it out, I can actually use this little value scale that I made. So they sell value scales like this. They're called value finders. And this is just one that I've made myself. But I am just going to kind of look and try to match just by holding this right up to the ball. So it's probably about this value. So the third darkest value I made using my 2B pencil. So I don't quite have to switch over to the 4B just yet. Okay, so I've been working on this for the past 40 minutes or so, and I've just gone ahead and laid down all my values, refined them, looked for contrasts. I'm sure you'll notice as I was working on this, I was paying very close attention to areas where the object, the ball, and the background in this case come together, and I was looking for the contrast there. Also here where the ball and the tabletop overlap one another, I push the contrast in the background there. Now the reason for that is I'm trying to eliminate lines, because lines have a tendency to flatten out form. If you're trying to create a three-dimensional looking form, you want to look for value contrasts rather than lines. In nature, we see value against value or color against color, not lines. So you want to think about defining edges with tonal contrasts rather than lines, and that will give you a much more realistic three-dimensional looking drawing. It reveals form much better than lines do alone. As I was working on this, I just want to pull up my value scale once again. I noticed that I really didn't have a lot of darks. So if I was to bring this up here and were to look at these values, what I ended up going with as my darkest value for, let's say, the cast shadow was the darker 4B. Okay, if we look at that next to the actual object, you know, it's actually somewhere between the lighter 4B and the darker 4B. So that was pretty much my range from the white of the paper to that darker 4B. I really didn't have anywhere where I had really solid darks. I didn't use the 6B at all. Now I could probably do that in the background if I was trying to match what I see, but in this case, I don't really need that. I like the atmospheric quality. There's nice space, nice depth in this. So I don't need to push my dark that far. I like the fact that the cast shadow here is my darkest dark. So that pretty much sums it up. If I was to draw any other subject, I would approach it the same way. So I would approach a portrait or a figure the very same way. Measuring first, getting my shapes right, my contour shapes, my shadow shapes, applying my value as one tone, and understating it in the beginning, going for a slightly lighter tone, and then adding darks as I go, and adding variation as I go. So that's about it, and in the next lesson, stay tuned, I will talk about another type of measuring technique that you can use in drawing called comparative measuring. So stay tuned, and I hope everybody enjoys drawing and painting. In the meantime, bye-bye.